And now I'll hand over to, I'll introduce you to Claire Williams from Anti-Discrimination New South Wales and Dr. Eloise Brook from the Gender Centre. And just to let any legal aid staff know who are joining us this morning that we have an internal staff network called the Legally Queer Network, and you're very welcome to join that network, and it's a great place to go where you can receive support from colleagues in a confidential space. So yeah, welcome Eloise and welcome Claire, and I'll hand over to you now, Claire.
Thanks so much, and thank you, Bridget, and for Legal Aid inviting us to the seminar today, and thanks, Eloise, for sharing the seminar with me. I'm just going to have a chat today about Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. And in starting, I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We can have the next slide. Thanks, Bridget. Is the next slide? Oh, great. So just a little bit about Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. We're the New South Wales state government body that administered the legal act, which is the Anti-Discrimination Act, which was established in 1977. So I'm just going to talk to you about the act. There's going to be a lot of legal information, and because we've got a short time today, you'll be given a PDF of the presentation. So I'm just going to touch on some of the things, but the most important thing for you to understand is that we answer inquiries. So we have an inquiry line that is open from 9 to 4 p.m. every day. We investigate and resolve complaints through a method called conciliation. We raise awareness about discrimination and its impacts. We grant exemptions for the Act itself, and we advise the government about discrimination issues. One important fact I just want to say is that our inquiry service and conciliation service is free, and you are able to use your own language when accessing our services. Next slide, thank you. So I just wanted to talk about what is discrimination. So in New South Wales, unlawful discrimination is when you've been treated less favourably than someone else. Sorry, Bridget, you might just have to tap that slide a couple of times for those. Because of a number of reasons, for example, your race, your disability, and in this case, we're talking about being transgender. But it's important to say sexual harassment, vilification, and victimisation are also against the law. Next slide, thank you. One very important fact that I want to share with you today is about the Anti-Discrimination Act review. So the Attorney General has asked for the Law Reform Commission to review the Anti-Discrimination Act, and there's been monumental shifts in society and demographics and attitudes since the Act came into place. So you can imagine in 1977, the Act was designed to look at issues that were occurring then. And so the current review provides an opportunity to benefit from the experience of almost 50 years of anti-discrimination laws, and we need to ensure that the new Act reflects best practice and it delivers genuine and effective solutions for people experiencing discrimination, and it improves equality for people in New South Wales. So there were preliminary discussions regarding the Act last year, and Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, along with a number of LGBTIQIA organisations, welcomed the opportunity. So the Law Reform Commission is managing the review, and you can read our submission on the Law Reform Commission's website. And it's very important to say that Anti-Discrimination New South Wales supports amending the Act on the following grounds. So the Anti-Discrimination New South Wales supports changing the grounds to sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex or innate variations of sex characteristics, and religion or religious belief. So next slide, thanks. So it's important to say, when we talked about those grounds of discrimination, discrimination is against the law if it happens in an area of your public life. And the areas of your public life, if Bridget just taps the next, yeah. So here's the areas of your public life. So at work, in education, where goods and services are being provided, where accommodation is being provided with registered clubs, and also in terms of the grounds that I talked about before, carers discrimination is only against the law at work, but when we're talking about transgender discrimination, it's against the law in all of those areas that you can see. Next slide, thanks. So I just wanted to talk about the recent news. You would have seen in the media that the New South Wales Parliament has passed a bill to ban LGBTQ plus conversion practices. And this is really important information. So on the 22nd of March, the New South Wales Parliament passed a bill that bans LGBTQ plus conversion practices. And conversion practice can be formal or informal. And they can be based on the false ideology that LGBTQ people are broken and require treatment. And this is false. So evidence shows that conversion practices are dangerous and damaging. So the bill itself amends the Anti-Discrimination Act to create a civil response scheme which allows complaints about conversion practices to be made to Anti-Discrimination New South Wales for conciliation. But under the scheme, Anti-Discrimination New South Wales also has investigation, education and research functions, which is really fabulous. So the bill will take effect in 12 months' time. So this means that Anti-Discrimination New South Wales cannot accept complaints about conversion practices for 12 months. We are receiving some calls and inquiries about that. Please be aware that there are support services, and Eloise will talk about that today as well, but there are agencies such as ACON, Lifeline, the Gender Centre, 2010 and QLife, which would you are able to gain assistance from. Next slide, thanks. So I just wanted to specifically talk about transgender discrimination. So it's against the law when you've been treated less favourably because you're transgender, or people may just think you're transgender, or if you're treated as your former sex when you're a recognised transgender person, or when you're forced to follow a rule or requirement as your former sex, when you're treated less favourably because you're the relative, friend or colleague of a person who's transgender, or a person who's assumed to be transgender. So the law protects all transgender people, no matter how they affirm their gender. Next slide, thank you. So vilification, it's important to mention that vilification is a public act that could incite hatred or contempt or severe ridicule against a person or a group. So vilification because of certain characteristics against the law, and included in that group is being transgender as well. Next slide. Thank you. I just also wanted to mention transgender vilification. So transgender vilification is against the law. It's a public act that could incite hatred or serious contempt or severe ridicule towards people who are transgender. So a public act, let's think about what some of those things might be. Communication, so think about some of the things you hear on radio or on TV or even in the newspaper. They may be signs, flags or clothing that can be seen by the public. It may be as simple as a leaflet drop or distributing and sharing information to the public. So that's some of the ways that a transgender person might be vilified. It's important to remember that any public act that threatens or incites violence towards a person or a group of persons on their basis of their religious belief or affiliation or sexual orientation or gender identity, intersex status or HIV status is a criminal offence. And if we're talking about violence, this should be referred to the police. Or if we're even talking about something, a public act that occurred and you don't know the person's name, it may be, excuse me, be able to be caught on CCTV cameras, and you may be able to make a complaint to the police. So next slide, thank you. So here's some statistics, and obviously not everybody complains. So please don't consider this as all the discrimination that's occurred in New South Wales. So in 2022 to 23, we received 34 complaints of homosexual discrimination. That's up 14 from the previous year. 25 complaints of homosexual vilification. That's up 5. 19 complaints of transgender discrimination and 21 complaints of transgender vilification. Okay, so all those stats are up from the previous year. Next slide, thank you. So where is transgender discrimination not unlawful. So there are exceptions to the law. So the provision of education by private institutions, there's been a lot of public debate in the media about this recently. Employment in private educational institution, employment in organisations that have less than 6 employees, and some professional sporting activities. Next slide, thank you. So just in terms of sport, it's important to say the Australian Human Rights Commission, which is the federal agency that also deals with complaints of discrimination, has developed guidelines in 2019 about sporting organisations, including transgender people in sport. Now, sport has been very much in the news recently regarding a lot of news regarding excluding people who are transgender from sport. So please do look up their guide. It's unlawful to discriminate against a person who's trans or presumed to be trans when playing community sport. No matter who you are or what your gender is, every person has the right to physical activity. However, there are exceptions to the law in many professional sporting codes. So next slide, thank you. So just in terms of those, so to lodge a complaint with New South Wales, Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, a complaint needs to be made in writing. So in saying that, we're talking about sending us an email or filling in our digital complaint report that's online on our website. So we're a free service and you do not need a solicitor to make a complaint to our service. You can lodge a complaint in any language, and our inquiry officers that I mentioned that are available from 9 to 4 p.m. every day, Monday to Friday, will be able to assist. If you make a call outside those hours, your call will be recorded and we will get back to you if it's a weekday within 24 hours. Complaints cannot be anonymous if you decide to make an informal complaint. But if you're deciding to make an informal complaint, we need your complaint to contain the following information. Why are you making a complaint? So what happened is specifically in terms of just transgender discrimination, what happened, who treated you less favourably, and what are the dates when the discrimination began and finished. So we advise people who are experiencing discrimination to keep a diary and to take notes in terms of what's happening to them. It's important to say complaints can be declined if they happen more than 12 months ago, but there is discretion. So if something happened to you over 12 months ago, please do still contact our service and explain why it's taken you more than 12 months to make that complaint. So just to chat next about our investigation process, we send a copy of your complaint to the respondent asking for a written response. The respondent is the party that you're making a complaint about, and then the response is then sent to you, the complainant, for comment. We decide whether to try and help the parties to resolve the complaint by conciliation, and conciliation can happen, but sometimes doesn't happen if the complaint's declined, and sometimes before the complaint even gets to the conciliation process, it can be resolved by people simply, they may mention that they've made a complaint to AD New South Wales. Sometimes it may be resolved when that is disclosed. So next slide, thanks. So just to chat about conciliation. So conciliation, we resolve complaints through conciliation. This is a conference where both parties meet up, and it allows both sides to discuss this discrimination and the issues surrounding it. It attempts to resolve the complaint, and it educates both sides about their rights and responsibilities under the law, and it raises awareness so that respondents know how to prevent discrimination in the future. Important to say, our conciliators remain neutral during the process. Next slide, thank you. So the potential outcomes of a conciliation, what are they? Well, it could be an apology or a statement of regret, a job reinstatement, a transfer or promotion. It may be compensation, access to a previously denied opportunity or service, workplace education in the workplace that you're making a complaint about, or staff training, and a change in policy. It's not just one thing that people can ask for. They can ask for a number of things, but there's some examples. And what happens if that complaint isn't resolved? Then it can be sent to the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, which is like a court. So even if it's been declined by our service, it still may go to NCAT, and the complaint can be withdrawn withdrawn by the complainant at any time without penalty if they decide not to go ahead. In using NCAT, normally solicitors would be used where you don't need to use a solicitor using our service. Next slide, thank you. Most important thing to share with you today is a couple of case studies. So I'll just read through the first one. The names of the people have changed and we have stock photos because our conciliations are confidential. So Kayleen is proud of her transgender identity. She worked in retail and did her job well, maintaining a positive performance record. She also received praise from customers and her supervisors for her service. So Kayleen would engage with curious customers if they initiated friendly conversations with her surrounding her transgender identity. When this was discovered by Kayleen's employer, meaning her employer discovered that she was talking to clients regarding her transgender identity, she was counselled for speaking openly, and she received a negative performance review at the end of her probation period, and she was later terminated. And Kayleen felt she had to hide who she was at work, which caused her mental health to suffer. She lodged a complaint of transgender discrimination with our service, and during conciliation, her employer denied of Kayleen's termination of employment was linked to her trans identity. However, they sympathised with Kayleen and agreed to provide her with employment references and assisted her with job seeking. And the employer was agreed to pay a monetary payment, which was accepted. So that's just one case example. And the other case example I wanted to share with you was about Jessie. So Jessie works in the automotive industry. She had gender-affirming surgery and felt harassed by her colleagues when they made comments about her. They misgendered her using her previous name and pronouns to humiliate her. So Jessie made a complaint of transgender discrimination. She arranged a meeting with the general manager at a workplace and informed him of a formal complaint. They agreed he would speak to managers and staff about respectful workplace behaviour, reiterate workplace harassment policies, and enrol staff in online training. And Jessie was satisfied with the outcome, and the matter was resolved. Next slide, thank you. So just important to say, as I mentioned, give us a call. So you'll be receiving this information on a PDF. This is our free number, 1800 670 812. Please give us a call. As I mentioned, our phones are open from Monday to Friday 9 to 4, but you can send a recorded message as well. And the next slide, thank you. Please do contact us if you've experienced discrimination or vilification, or you simply want to make an inquiry about it. Our inquiry staff are very well trained and they'll be able to assist you. And important to say, they can also refer you to other services, may they be support services or other agencies that may deal with your complaint if it's not under our Act. So there's our toll-free number, and there's also the telephone interpreter services, which you would dial that number first, 131 450, if you require an interpreter. The next slide, thank you. So important to say that's all our contact information. When you receive this, there's a QR code on the right-hand side of your screen, and you're able to scan that if you want to get our monthly newsletter, which is called Equal Time. And there's all our contact details on the phone, on the slide, sorry. And also please do visit our website, which is Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. Next slide, thank you. And thanks so much, and there will be time for questions, but I want to hand you across back to Bridget and Eloise to share some more information with you.
Thanks very much, Claire, and thanks for keeping to time. And thank you, Eloise. You're up now.
Fantastic. If you could just jump to the third slide. I think I've kind of put 2 extra, 1 and then 2 and then 3. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on today, and pay my respects to elders past and present and future. I'd also like to thank Legal Aid for having me to speak again this year. And as always, it's a pleasure to work alongside Claire. And I'd like to kind of acknowledge the incredible work that she does and that AD New South Wales does as well. So thank you so much. I'm Eloise. I'm from the Gender Centre. A brief outline of who we are and what we do. We've been around for 40 years. We started our work in the mid-early 80s, providing crisis accommodation for trans and gender diverse street based sex workers back in a different time when governments kind of didn't quite understand the community and just saw people in need. So we've grown the organisation over into our 5th decade. We are at our core accommodation, but we have expanded to work in areas of case management and counselling and mental health. One of the things that we observe as pretty much the main support organisation in New South Wales for trans people is that there's a complexity of issues and concerns that one issue, whether it's housing, goes hand in hand with no or low employment or mental health kind of challenges, or health issues, or a range of things that make things really complex. We have expanded or continue to expand education and training, which we've done for a couple of years. We provide social community opportunities for the trans community as well. Isolation is a big part of the problem that trans people face, which I'll go into in more detail. In the last 10 years, we have expanded to support families and young people. At the moment, our parents group, which is online based, has just under 1,100 families now, right across New South Wales and also outside of New South Wales and into other states in Australia too. So the work that we've done in that area has been really important. And as everyone kind of who has any is listening to any media around trans people, young people seem to be a flashpoint globally, not just in Australia. Next slide, please. So just to kind of give you a snapshot, this is the Gender Centre's, some of the figures that we kind of bring about the work that we do. I think it's important to say that we think that probably at 1% of the community, of the wider community, is or identifies as trans. This has historically been considered less. There is more recent stuff that looks into young people, expands into gender diversity, that increases that number. But we are 1% is a significant population. The Gender Centre provides about 90% of the trans-specific services in New South Wales. And that's a really important kind of figure to point out, because historically trans people have been kept or included kind of half in, half out of the umbrella of different support organisations. Things have kind of been stitched together to support trans people. And that often means that trans people don't seek help or support from services that they don't identify with. You can see that we do a lot of work, that we actually we're paddling very hard under the water to kind of keep up with things. But essentially, the community continues to kind of I wouldn't say to expand, but it certainly continues to become more visible. We have recently moved into our new centre in Marrickville, which is a great improvement from where we were previously at, and I think also reflective of state government and departments' appreciation of the importance of taking care of the trans community. Next slide, please. And that is because even though things continue to improve for the community, and living in Australia compared to anywhere else in the world is for the trans community, you're considerably better off living here than you are anywhere else. One of the figures that I always begin this kind of conversation with is about as good as things can be, as relatively stable as it is for the community, our young people still experience attempted suicide rates of 1 in 2, so 48.1%, and that's the 14 to 24-year-old age group, which is effectively 20 times the national average, which this figure has been been kind of available since 2017 when it was released in the Trans Pathways report out of Perth, but continues to be a serious concern, 7 going on 8 years later. And that's made up by a number of kind of factors. So especially with young people, parental rejection is not as superficially 10% is a terrible figure, but it's actually a better way of looking at it from our perspective is that constitutes about 90% or 85% parents are generally quite supportive, but still the mental health and the effect upon the negative presentation of trans people, that we see on a weekly, if sometimes daily basis, has a corrosive effect upon the community, has a corrosive effect upon younger and younger people. You can see some of the figures around anxiety and depression there. But we also note that as we're a service that supports families as well, we see the wear and tear upon parents as well. And noting that parents are generally tend to be the #1 support for our transgender diverse kids, keeping parents healthy and on top of their own kind of challenges is essential to kind of supporting young people as well. There's also some figures about the work that we do in New South Wales schools. We continue to support trans and gender diverse students in various schools across New South Wales. But we also note that can be an area in which we're still having to kind of do a lot of work to change discrimination and persistence. And I know I get to go after Claire and listen to some of the amazing work that AD New South Wales does, and I think, oh my gosh, it all sounds so simple. Here are all of the things that you can't do, and that should be great, right? But we see that it's not the case. We see that certainly in the school settings that it's far more complicated. And I will get to that if I can have the next slide, please. So I think my mantra working at a gender centre is this 48.1% figure around attempted suicide rates, the 20 times the national average. I mean, we know from the same study that if you take those young people and you keep them in the safety of a loving, supportive family, and you validate them in their journey and identity, their mental health, it actually becomes the national average. This is a figure that I carry around with me, because it seems to be that if there was one thing that we could do to support our community and our young people, it would be to keep talking to people about the importance of support, the importance of validation, the importance of making sure that our young people get access and that their parents also have the support so that they can go on and live their best lives. We see both those families, and we rejoice in the success of their transitions, but we also get to see what it looks like when community doesn't get that support, when community is rejected by family, when they're on the streets at young ages, and the knock-on effect, the mental health aspect of that, the health aspect of that, all of these things go on to produce a client base that we will always be looking after with complex needs. So if we can catch our young people at that end of their lives, it helps us to reduce the number of really complex kind of cases that are very sad and very tragic. Yeah, next slide, please. So for us, and this kind of, I think this is a really important point to kind of make about the nature of resilience in community, because a lot of what I'll talk about in case studies going forward really comes back to what is, I believe, the oxygen that keeps the community alive. So, for example, the average trans and gender diverse person in New South Wales experiences a level of discrimination day-to-day kind of instances of what we would call microaggression, significantly more than the average population. So we all know what it's like to experience bumping into someone who's a bit of a douchebag, or who's a bit rude, or they are having a bad day and they're rude back to you. And we all have the processes in our lives to kind of go, you know what, I felt icky about that person, but you know what, I'm just going to focus on the good things and I'm going to move on. And so we might experience that occasionally. Maybe we experience it more than once a week and we're seeing a counsellor, or we're all of us managing the effects of mental health and the ways to kind of make sure that we have the internal strength to kind of put those comments behind us or kind of move on. With trans people, that experience is amplified over and over and over. So it's not just once a week. It's not even just once a day. Going out your door, going to do the simple things such as going to the bank or going to the doctors or going shopping or going to the post office, all of those experiences equate to a series of aggressions and discrimination, little microaggressions, little kind of moments of discrimination. And every kind of step of the way, whether that's walking out your door, walking past people, walking onto a bus, sitting down, seeing whether someone's going to make a comment, whether someone's going to move their bag in the way, whether you're going to get a weird look. And each of those little moments, these little kind of experiences, erode a trans person's resilience. And usually by the time they've gotten to wherever they need to go, having gone through a series of these kinds of experiences, or even having read them, because sometimes you can misread them. Say they end up at the doctor's with their appointment, and the secretary at the front desk looks up and is rushed and says something like, "Oh, excuse me, sir, who are you?" Or perhaps the secretary calls out that person's dead name. That's the point where that level of resilience has become so low that you get a reaction, or a trans person is going to confront or perhaps leave or have an internal conversation about never coming here again, or what can I do from the safety of my own house to be able to not experience this on a daily basis. Yeah. So our community member and our community members are now spending less and less time out in community, out in public. They're protecting themselves against these experiences by essentially going into isolation. They still need community, they still need stimulation, and invariably they end up online, which, as we all know, is one of the worst places for anyone who's struggling with mental health, struggling with resilience, to kind of go. So the isolation compounds the mental health, and you have a cycle where resilience continues to go lower and lower. And then we begin to understand how an attempted suicide rate of 48.1% in our younger cohort, but also, you know, it's still serious in our older ones, is possible. So the work that we do at the Gender Centre, one of the core things is building resilience and placing community and interaction as much as possible. Next slide, please. So in my observation, working at the Gender Centre as the Health and Communications Manager, this is one of the things that really threads its way through all of these instances where you experience discrimination, microaggressions, misgendering, and the way that it just breaks down and erodes your sense of confidence, your sense of resilience. And one of the main problems to this is that the process of lodging it like a complaint, the problem of, say, how do I go through a world, and if someone is discriminatory to me, how do I kind of rectify that through like an anti-discrimination process? And one of the main problems is for the trans community is each of these little moments are so small and on a bus or in passing that they kind of build up over time. And only in instances where there's outrageous or overt discrimination might a community member consider lodging a complaint to, you know, of anti-discrimination. By the same token, that community member might have a level of kind of protection or resilience that they just go, I don't have capacity to do this. It's just another thing, and I'm going to move past it. And this is one of the core problems that we see with our young people and their experience in schools, which I'll come to. So then, just to say that just on that interpersonal experience of discrimination, on that daily kind of basis, on top of that, like an umbrella of almost constant media, almost constant kind of negative information washing in from overseas, washing in from, from the US and from the UK, the framing of issues that are happening in other societies like America and the UK as being relevant to Australia, our politicians and spokespeople, or select ones of those, looking for opportunities to capitalise, bringing or trying to bring in these issues to Australia. And then kind of this ongoing conversations about women's rights, and the way that sport's being supposedly upended by including trans people, and all those kind of narratives just lead to such an erosion of mental health and the desire to be out anywhere. Next slide, please. So, starting initially with a case study, I guess, about young people in schools. So schools in New South Wales, obviously you can't discriminate against trans and gender diverse people, but often what we're seeing in this instance is young people who are trans, who are intersecting with other minority groups, especially religious-based ones, who are in situations where overworked schools and headmasters are effectively kind of allowing certain types of behaviours to supersede other types of behaviours when it comes to discrimination. One of the problems that we have is that in New South Wales is that we have the problem with the good principle, and that effectively runs in New South Wales means that if you are going to a school and you have a principal or a deputy principal or someone up in the school hierarchy who is supportive of trans and gender diverse people, then you tend to have a school that is excellent, a school that supports families and young people, and that is a safe haven for trans kids. Conversely, if you have a high school where you have a deputy or principal, or any of those kind of in the hierarchy who is neutral, or even negative to trans people, then that affects the entire culture of that school. You don't know when you turn up to that school what the policies are going to be like unless you can get word of mouth from other parents. But effectively, this is a core problem in New South Wales. When it comes to our young people, it is really difficult to know whether a school is good or whether a school is bad until we have our kids in there and what they are experiencing. And a bad school is bad. It often involves bullying and violence. It leads to a reduction in our young people attending school. A good school, like for any student, is an amazing, or can be an amazing experience. One of the main problems that we see repeatedly over and over and over with our young people when they experience violence or discrimination in schools is that there is an incident, the parents are horrified and outraged, they contact the school responds, maybe puts a bit of resistance up, or maybe is even hostile in return, and the parents almost in every instance then turn to the young person and say, we want to lodge a complaint, we want to do something about this. And the young person says, no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be exposed, I don't want to talk to a police officer, I just want to get on with my life. And the parents go, okay, let's do that. So anecdotally, we hear stories of what's happening to our young people, but it doesn't move up the ladder in any kind of meaningful way. So the steps that we might need to correct or change or put pressure upon the Department of Education is there, but it's not really usable. Next slide, please. So The other kind of case study that I just wanted to mention is that last year the Gender Centre worked with SWAP and also with especially with our Indigenous community members. There was the Special Commission into Hate Crimes that was looking at gay and trans-based hate crimes. The GC decided that it was going to do a report. But we wanted to do a report that was more meaningful to our community, because often our community gets asked lots of questions about their trauma, and that trauma gets turned into some kind of report that then disappears. And our community often is left traumatized, having related, recounted stories, only to then see nothing happen. So we kind of promised the community that we would do the same thing again, but this time we would try to do it in a more meaningful way. So we got together a bunch of our elders who experienced life as trans people between 1970 and 2011. And the one thing that we found in all of these stories, first of all, there was predominantly trans women and people of colour and Indigenous trans women. And the one thing that we discovered that we didn't know that we were going to discover, but we did, is that overwhelmingly over those decades of time, it was police discrimination and violence that was the #1 killer of trans women in New South Wales. So it was a little bit of a revelation. So we did the report came out, but the other thing that came out of this report was that that our elders effectively had come up with a series of 17 points that they wanted to implement in the community to build better relationships with the police, which is a strongly divergent position around police than what our younger community members do. So it's an ongoing conversation, but in terms of kind of getting kind of peace and reconciliation, I suppose, around what's happened with police, but also having viable relationships with law enforcement to kind of like take care or help the community. Next slide, please. The only thing I'd like to say is that for all these instances, the GC kind of continues to work in this space. We have some really great solutions that I don't have time to talk about when it comes to things like how we work with students, the kinds of programs that we have and that exist that are really useful and can really make a difference. That these problems are not intractable or unsolvable. They just require recognition and acknowledgement of what the community has gone through and is still going through. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eloise, and thank you, Claire, as well. We have some questions. The first few are addressed to you, Claire. The first question is on the discrimination laws at the moment. If it is immensely difficult for individuals to legally identify as the gender that they resonate with, especially in New South Wales, how are these laws going to cover them legally?
Okay, so under our legislation, so under the Anti-Discrimination Act, the law protects all transgender people no matter how they affirm their gender. So if a person identifies as transgender and tells us that they identify as transgender, they're able to make a complaint to our service.
Thank you, Claire. Then Alex had a question also for you. How does the Anti-Discrimination Act get enforced, and how do police handle victims' experiences of vilification or discrimination?
Okay. So in terms of the conciliation, there's the grounds and the areas, and the way that the Anti-Discrimination Act has been written previously in 1977 is reliant on people making a complaint. So people are able to make a complaint to our service if they experience discrimination, and then they can make an inquiry if they choose to make a formal complaint. Therefore, that complaint can be conciliated. In terms of the conciliation process, the conciliation officer can tell people that they must attend a conciliation conference. That's both parties, the person making the complaint and the representative from the group that they're complaining about. But if the complainants or the respondents refuse to attend, the person who refuses to attend can be fined by the courts. And that's a result of not saying that, well, not attending. As I mentioned, if it's not resolved through our agency, it can go to the tribunal, which is called NCAT. And also with regard to the comment about police, I can't really comment as to how the police, the police service handles complaints of vilification. That would maybe something that we might be able to get a police officer involved in, saying how they would do that step by step.
Thank you, Claire. There's a question about how, if there's any enforcement mechanisms after conciliation, so to enforce the other party carrying out whatever orders have been agreed to. Is there any remedy for that if they don't follow through
so
with what they've agreed to?
So generally, because our service is confidential and you don't need a solicitor or a lawyer to use our service, generally parties do like to use our service rather than going to NCAT, which is public and is a tribunal, and then you may need to use a solicitor to be able to use the service. So if there was a conciliation case and the matter was not, the remedy might be somebody getting their job back or policy and training taking forth, then we would ask the complainant to let us know that this is not happening, and then case by case we'd look at how we could resolve that.
Thank you, Claire. Eloise, there's a question for you about whether the Gender Centre is able to provide face-to-face outreach in rural and remote areas.
Yes, we do. We have a rural and remote caseworker who does the road trips out. So it's about contacting the Gender Centre and making an appointment. It's incredibly popular and it's always booked up in advance.
Oh, I can imagine. They must have a very busy job.
They do, but they love it. They absolutely love being on the road.
Oh, that's great. Another question for you. How can advocacy, I guess for both of you, how can advocacy organisations help further with feeding back in schools?
One of the things that I'm kind of working on, at least initially, is I think I think that because of the state of things in New South Wales with the Department of Education, it might actually take parents to do some kind of class action discrimination process to change the culture. Because I think the main problem we have is that if families and young people feel like speaking directly to a police officer or being identified in that process is too risky, the process of a class action discrimination amongst families might take the edge out of it, not specifically kind of trigger them in terms of recounting the exact kind of instance, or that it's part of a group or a community, might be worth doing. It's something I'm kind of talking to people and trying to kind of get the momentum going. Families who I've been talking to have already kind of are interested in doing it. So that might be one thing, one step. If you've got any thoughts or experience in that area, please contact me. I'd love to kind of chat about that.
Thanks, Eloise. And another question for you from Alex. Does the Gender Centre interact with community legal services? And is there a provision for specific support for trans Indigenous people?
So we work with Legal Aid, and so we refer people to Legal Aid. Legal Aid and also ICLC. So depending upon what their issue is in New South Wales, we kind of refer them on. We actually also have a number of lawyers who contact us to say, hey, in this particular area, we would like to lend support. So pro bono stuff is also available. And that's just an instance of contact the Gender Centre, having a chat with us. And if we can kind of point you in the right direction or kind of put you in contact with someone, then we'll do our best to do that.
And when you say ICLC, that's the Inner City Legal Centre.
Yes, that's right.
And they have a geographical limitation, I imagine.
They do.
Yeah, so that'd be Sydney, limited
That's
to Sydney.
Right. But they do refer on, like they do have a network of, like we all do our best to try to make the map work.
Yeah, in asking that, I was just thinking about our rural and remote people.
Yes.
So they're all the questions that we have so far. There's a few more minutes if anybody else had a question that they wanted to ask. I had a little bit of trouble uploading the handout, but I did manage to upload it into the chat in the end. But in case anybody hasn't been able to access it that way, I will also email it to everyone who's registered for today's webinar.
Can I just, sorry, I just noticed that Alex's question, the second part about Indigenous trans people.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Contact the Gender Centre, but also Black is also another option as well. But once you start talking to us, we'll problem solve the best way to do that.
Thanks, Eloise.
And can I just say also, the law isn't perfect, and the New South Wales Law Commission is looking at obviously making changes to the Act, and so encourage people to go on to that site, and there will be a second round of for people to make submissions about changes to the Act as well, the Anti-Discrimination Act.
A great opportunity, isn't it, for people to make comments about how they would like things to change, particularly people who've had experiences where the law hasn't delivered what they needed it to deliver. Yeah. Someone's just commented that ACON have told them that Inner City Legal Centre can help statewide. So I might give them a call and check on that, and I'll let people know when I send that email with the resource from today's presentation. And just also to let people know that our webinars are recorded and are uploaded onto the Legal Aid New South Wales YouTube channel, and I will send everyone a link to where they can access the recording, and you can also access a transcript when it's uploaded onto YouTube. And also, if anyone has questions that they think about after the webinar, feel free to email. I should have put a slide up with our email address, but it's legalaid.nsw.gov.au, and I'm happy to forward them on to either Eloise or Claire. If there's one more question. Oh no, sorry, I thought there was one more question coming through, but it didn't. It didn't. So I think we're right on time, and I wanted to say a really big thank you to Claire and Eloise for agreeing to participate in this webinar today. I really think it's important that we share this information about what supports are available out there for trans and gender diverse people. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. And I'll say goodbye to everybody and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.